Welcome, ladies, to this episode of the She is Extraordinary podcast. I am so excited because I'm interviewing Jennifer Kem. She is a brand strategist and the creator of the Master Brand Method, which is a powerful framework to win customers' hearts, which is what we're all about, right? Jen uses what she calls the Master Brand Method, which she created in coaching entrepreneurs and celebrity brands like Oprah Winfrey Network and Steve Harvey, as well as major corporations, including Verizon, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and the Bank of Hawaii. Let's welcome Jen to the show.
Judy, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I can't wait to dive into the Master Brand Method. As you know, I was at an event where you spoke and you literally brought the house down with your methodology. But before we dive into that, I would love to briefly touch on the failures, quote unquote, right, that you endured and overcame to get to where you are now with several million-dollar businesses.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think that's you're teeing up a really important question because every single one of us has quote unquote failure and everybody has triumphs as well, right? That's what God gave us in terms of our life experience. And there's gold in all of that. And so thanks for asking. And I think it's a core part of storytelling when you're growing your business. And so great tee up, Judy. Awesome question. To answer it, I will say this. It's a long winding yarn because I haven't had just one failure. I've had multiple failures on my road to greatness, if you will, but I'm still trying to catch greatness is how I look at it. I like to say that I'm not a spring chicken. I'm a seasoned chicken.
I love that.
I've been doing what I do for over 25 years and, first in the corporate world. And then I started my own company in 2006 and have hashtag can't stop, won't stop since then. But I would kind of look at two major quote unquote failures to presence those because they were failures of proportion that I can only say if I didn't have both faith and trust, I probably would have chosen to default back to my old life. Okay. So the first one is, I actually never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. I never thought I was going to build a business. That wasn't my dream growing up. I saw myself running a big company. Like everyone in my family was either in the military or they worked in healthcare, which are very noble career pursuits. But I really didn't see that for myself. I also saw myself potentially as a performer. Like I thought I wanted to be Annie on Broadway when I was 8. And,
wow.
But I was a very obedient Filipino Asian child. It was like, okay, get good grades, go to college, do the things. And so I kind of thought being a rebel looked like working in the corporate world because to my mom, that was actually quite risky. Like people got laid off in the corporate world. It was like, she was like, go work for the government. And I was like, I cannot work for the government. That is not my container. But anyway, I had a very, what I call, quick upwardly mobile career in corporate because I had a few really good mentors and actually a few bad ones along the way too, who taught me what it would take to do that. And the lesson in it was, take on projects that nobody wants and you'll get seen and you'll get promoted and you'll get admired that you're willing to do the hard things. And so I took that advice early on in my career. And, by the time I was 30, I, already became a VP of the West Coast for marketing for Verizon. And I was working on a project that they had told me, if you take on this project and this project sucked, let's just put it that way. I'm just so sorry. Like it was like the hardest project. Nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And I was like taking that advice from earlier mentors. I said, I'm your huckleberry. Like I'll say yes. And I was promised that if I did this and implemented it at least semi-successfully, that I would get promoted to CMO, which was a big goal of mine because I ultimately, as I said, wanted to be a C-suite executive and ultimately be CEO of a big company. Anyway, long story short, I worked for a year on it. I have 2 young children at the time, 2 young girls, and they had all the things that most of us who have children have, which is soccer games, volleyball games, after school stuff, all the things. And for a year, I really didn't pay much attention to my home life. Now, when I say that, obviously, I want to just say to all of you, my children weren't completely neglected or anything, but they certainly, I had to kind of trade off all the hours at work that I was working. And at the end of the day, what happened was the project was implemented successfully. This particular project has made billions, that's a B, of money for Verizon. It was the predecessor to Netflix, which is called Internet Protocol TV. And the bottom line is I got passed up for the promotion when it was time, even though I had been promising. I had sacrificed so much, Judy, right? Like including what was the biggest sacrifice of kind of being the most present mother that I wanted to be. So, I was frustrated and it felt unjust. And I literally, I remember crying in the elevator bay after I walked out of my boss's office and crying and saying to God, literally, like, this isn't fair. Like, wow, I worked this hard. And I was in that space of feeling dejected and like a victim and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I got home, I looked at my two kids and I realized, you know what? All the hard work in the world is not giving me freedom. And I made a decision right there that I was going to leave. And I don't have this sexy entrepreneur story that's like, oh, she quit in a blaze of glory. I actually did not, because I had two kids to think about. And I made a 9-month plan to exit my job. And let me tell you, Judy, it wasn't easy to exit this job because I was making $250,000 in salary with my total compensation was $400,000. Okay. Wow. Mm-hmm. I had a corner office with a disco ball in it. I had
I like that. I like that.
Right. And I had a parking spot that had my name on it. And that trophy was like the biggest thing because it felt very baller to drive into the parking lot and your name was on your parking spot. And so I had all these trophies, right, that showed, quote unquote, that I was successful, but I felt like such a failure because I still had to comply and be obedient to a system that doesn't work for me, that didn't help me see my future. And instead of getting mad, don't get me wrong, I was a little mad. I decided to make a plan to exit. So for 9 months, I saved my money. I took half of my salary and I put it in savings. I didn't buy anything new. And I quit my job. And I decided to become an entrepreneur. Well, the second big fail, so that was what I call a failure, because like I failed to like reach my goal, if you will. Like I had been very calcified in what I wanted to be when I grew up. And when that happened, I realized, wait a minute, is that what I really want to be when I grow up? So it wasn't a failure, but inside it felt like I was a failure. Like, wow, I worked this hard and I didn't get what I wanted. But that was just a lie I was telling myself to get me unfocused. But anyway, save my money, which was very hard because I like shoes. And went and started a retail business, which looking back, I would never, ever do it again. And it's no shade or shame to my retail friends because I love y'all. I admire you all. Anybody who's in the restaurant or retail business, I think are the heroes of this nation because it is so hard, besides the military, okay? Because it's so hard to run that. And what's interesting is at the time, because I didn't know what really entrepreneurship was like, I was like, oh, I just should start something based on my passions. And my passions, as I said, were shoes and shopping. Now, I'd never give that advice again. But let me just tell you this, but you don't know what you don't know until you decide. That's the whole point. Like I knew I had to decide on something. I just didn't know. So I decided, okay, I could do this. I have a strong marketing background. I can make anything happen because one of my gifts is I can smell the money. And so I found this retail concept. I started it. And for 2 years, I was an outlier. And what I mean by that is I was extremely successful the first 2 years. In fact, I had built a $10 million retail business in women's underwear. Okay.
Right.
And
wow.
And what's crazy is why did I choose underwear? I have to wear underwear. Well, I guess you don't have to wear it, but most of us choose, to wear it. But also the reason was, as I said, I can smell the money, right? It's one of my gifts. And although I didn't have this expertise in underwear, what I had was a market. I lived in Hawaii at the time, and there was no place to buy, women couldn't buy underwear. And I noticed as I was flying to Dallas on business a lot for Verizon that women would get off the plane in Honolulu and have a pink and white bag. It was a Victoria's Secret bag, and I did too. And I realized, wait a minute, we got to get on a plane 5 hours, 10 hours actually to Dallas to buy underwear. I was like, we got to fix that. So I started that company, and that's why it was so successful, because I can pick a winner. Okay. So that's the good news. The bad news is that was in 2006. 2 years later, there was something called 2008, which was the greatest recession of all time in the United States. And the two industries got hit the hardest were retail and real estate, of which I was in both of those industries, right? Because I had made so much money that I started expanding my footprint. And my financial advisor, I remember at the time, who, by the way, he's still my financial advisor, 15 years later, he said to me, we need to stop expanding. You need to hold on to your cash flow and your reserves. And I had gotten a little overconfident, Judy, those 2 years. And not in a, I don't think in an egotistical way, but more in a like, wow, this actually is working. Like, I found a winner. You know what? I'm going to bet on that. And he said, I think we should hold. And I didn't listen to him. And with one success on the other side of it became utter failure. 3 days before Christmas in 2008, I was so busy trying to keep afloat, and we were just bleeding money. Okay. Everybody was like, nobody would come into the stores for days at a time. We know that entire automobile brands went out of business. Do you remember Saturn or Hummer? I mean, they're gone, right? Like, they all died during that time. So if you think, like, who's going to pay $25 for drawers, underwear, if they can't afford their mortgage? You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to happen, right? So bottom line is, 3 days before Christmas, 2008, I was so busy trying to stay afloat, Judy. And remember my first failure with the corporate world, I didn't pay much attention to my daughters during that time because I was so freaking busy, like trying to stay alive in the business, that I didn't even notice how bad it was until 3 days before Christmas. I went in and they had locked all my accounts, and I was being sued by both the federal government as well as the all my landlords and my business partners, because we could not pay our rent. We couldn't pay our mortgage on our real estate holdings. And I kept taking the money that was in what we were making, and I was just trying to throw it at the business, right? So I was like also personally absolutely hurting because I couldn't pay myself anymore. I couldn't pay my employees. So I had to take everything. It was just, let's just say it was awful. And as a result, I had to make the hard decision 6 months later, even though my financial advisor told me immediately, he's like, you need to file for bankruptcy immediately. You need to protect the business and your finance. I was like, that is not happening. I am a woman of my word. I am not going to not pay my creditors, right? It's not happening. And he said, well, you're going to destroy your life. And I said, well, okay. And I did. I held up for 6 months. And a lot of that has to do with Filipino shame, I call it. Like, I didn't even want my mom to know how bad it was because I was so embarrassed, because first I went to the corporate world, but she didn't like, God bless her. And then I go and start a business, and she was like, oh my gosh, that's scary, And I was dealing with all of that pride I was holding on to, plus just shame. And as a result, I lost my house. I lost my business. I lost my marriage. I even lost my grandmother, who was my number one mentor, all in the span of about 3 months. And I was functionally homeless. The only silver lining, and I say this with very tentative description, is that when my grandmother passed away, she gave me her house. And I was able to move back. But this house was 120 years old, had not been kept up with. It was an old plantation house in the middle of the country. And I had to restart my life. And I went through a period of extreme depression and questioning everything and wondering, should I go back to the corporate world, where I knew at least they would probably hire me back just because, I had these skills and experience. But I really didn't want to, Judy. I got a taste of what being my own boss looked like. And even though it was just as hard or even harder than working for the system, I still had my autonomy. And I was like, okay, what do I do? So I was at a crossroads, and I chose entrepreneurship still. And, 15 years later, I've now taken all of those lessons and those failures and turned them into millions of dollars in my other companies. I now own an education company called Mastermind Institute, a consulting company called ChemCom. And, you know, I'm very grateful because without those quote unquote failures, I would not have learned the hard lessons that I needed to be smarter in today's world. And even during COVID, you know, so many people came to me because they knew that COVID obviously is not the same thing as 2008, but in terms of the fear that it struck in people's hearts and just for so many reasons, but especially if you're a business owner, um, you know, it was an interesting time and we actually grew our business during COVID. Um, and I'm grateful for all of it. And I'm definitely grateful for that time in my life. So I told you guys it was a long winding yard. That's still the short part of the story. There's so much there, but I hope that
that is so good. Thank you so much for sharing that. I do have one quick follow-up, if I might, because I have never been that low. But of course, you know, I've been in business since 2003, off and on. I was kind of at one point running my business is part-time while I was a full-time trial lawyer. So yeah, talk about a crazy schedule and all that. But I never was at a spot where I was almost at the point of bankruptcy. And so but I work with women who were like, I'm trying to grow my business and I can. And, you know, I've tried this and tried that or whatever. And some of them I know that may be listening here right now are feeling at that low spot.
Yes, that is.
Yeah. And so I guess I would love you to kind of allow us to peek into your brain and your mindset back then, Jen. Like, how do you pull yourself out of that horrible funk? How do you talk yourself into, yes, I can do this, when you really deep inside, you think you can, but you're not sure.
Well, I guess my answer to how I managed it is I allowed myself to surrender. And surrender is my most not favorite word, yet it's the most powerful word in my vocabulary. I basically sat in a funk, as I mentioned, for 6 months. I literally, if you really knew me, you would know that Jen Kem does not sit in front of her house in a rocking chair just watching cars drive by, but that's literally what I was doing for 6 months. I didn't even know, Judy, that I was functionally depressed. I had no idea because I'd never been, just like you said, you've never, you know, you didn't ever hit that low, which I really appreciate the transparency there. I also, first of all, I'd never hit that low. And number two, I'd never been what I call functionally depressed. I didn't even know what that looked like. You know, I was always a go-getter, ambitious. I was resilient, right? Yeah. And for the first time, I felt extremely fragile and fractured, right? And I didn't even know, I also didn't know how to ask for help because I just never did. And I think a lot of women are like that, right? We're so good at juggling a lot that we don't ask for enough help or support. Well, anyway, my help and support came in the form of my 10-year-old daughter, who is now 25. And I remember one day she came outside and she tapped me on the shoulder and I looked up at her like I was such a vacant human at the time. It just felt so like I was just searching for answers and honestly talking to God a lot, but I kept saying, I feel stuck. I feel stuck. I feel stuck. Please help me get unstuck. And the answer that I kept hearing was, the answer is around you. The answer is right around you. Just turn your head. And my daughter came outside and she tapped me on the shoulder and I turned my head and she said, Mommy, you're Jen Kem. You know what to do. It's time to wake up now.
Wow.
And I remember even right now saying it out loud, Judy, I still get chicken skin. My hair raises. I feel this
I bet emotion
because I can see her little beautiful face and the bravery it took for her to kind of go, okay, how long, you know, she was going to have to kind of caretaking for my younger daughter who was 6 at the time. And it was like, okay, how are we going to let mommy know that she can do this? And so that moment of clarity of looking at her and going, oh my gosh, I see what I need. And that is to get some help. And so I think right now at the timing of this recording, you know, mental health itself is being presenced a lot, which I think is awesome because I think we don't talk about it enough, even in relationship to business. you know, and I said, who can help me? And I called a friend who had been trying to reach me because I just was like unreachable in so many ways. And I said, you know, I think I need to go see a doctor or somebody to, and she said, oh my gosh, I have somebody for you. And I got to tell you, Judy, this doctor, I want to credit her. Her name's Suzanne Hammer. Amazing. She's no longer here on this planet, but she was a woman psychiatrist, and she was like, you need to sleep. That's the first thing. And I was like, sleep? Because I couldn't sleep. I was just completely awake for hours on end. Anyway, she said, first, we need to address the sleep. Next, then we'll address what's going on in your mind. But you can't think clearly if you don't have rest. And that's a lesson, I think, back to like in my mind. So now, 15 years later, I prioritize rest big time, Judy. Like that's the lesson, because I saw by her being loving but firm as heck on me. Like she was like, girl, if you want to get your mind right, you need to rest it, because it's just going to keep swirling and creating all these stories that are keeping you stuck. So that's the help I got. And, you know, there's a lot of ways to get help. But I think that what was going on in my mind was I got refocused because I saw what mattered, which was my children were my reasons. So
yeah. I love that. You know, I have 3 boys. My oldest is going to be 25 in a few short weeks. My baby just turned 20 on Monday, as a matter of fact. And so that just touches my heart in a special place when it was your daughter, your oldest daughter, who said, Mama, like, I need you back. Sister, like, where are you? So that's just awesome. And, you know, I especially appreciate too, ladies, if you're listening and you are like struggling, please reach out for help. I know in the past, as a young mom, when I left the practice of law to take care of my kids, I was like, I hate being alone, but I felt like, I was going to bother somebody. I didn't want to bother any of the other moms in the neighborhood. That was just crazy. So the isolation is not good, but thank you so much for sharing that, Jen.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to dive into the master brand method, which, you know, the key components of that, of course, I know, because I've heard it before, is archetypes. So can you give us just an overview of your master brand method and how these archetypes make your business unique in the marketplace?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, this method is what I call the mechanical part of my breakthrough. So when you ask my failure and then how did I, you know, transition to that, I had to go back to the basics, which was what made me so strong in the corporate world, and also what made me so strong in the entrepreneurial world in terms of the structure that I used, right? And this is what I specifically teach people about who want to build what I call a brand and a business that is scalable, but I don't care as much about scale, but I care more about sustainable, right? Because you don't start a business just because you want to get rich overnight. Well, some people do, but that's not realistic. Like it's a long game view. So the master brand method is actually a method I created when I reflected, you know, when I kind of digged myself under that hole that I just described to all of you. And I asked myself the question, how do I do this? Meaning pick a winner, smell the money, all those things that people loved me for, right? They were like, teach me how to be like that. And so I realized there was like a structure here that I just wasn't able to articulate. So I created one that I felt really supported the how to do it, right? The strategy of how to do the business part. Yeah. And so there are 5 components of the master brand market. First is archetypes. The second is audience. The third is aesthetics. The fourth is activation. And the fifth is amplification. Now, I know that's a lot of words, and try to say it fast 5 times would be pretty hard. But if I were to focus on the first step, which is archetypes, basically early on in my career, Judy, I actually worked for the biggest advertising agency in the world. And I first learned about the power of archetypes and how it was actually used as a significant way to influence buyer behavior when I worked for that advertising agency. A lot of people in business don't know this, but they use Carl Jung's archetypes to determine the voice of the brand, like how to message what the brand is about, which is ultimately why we purchase things. We create trust through communication and messaging, right? And so I dove deep into that and recalled it and brought it forward, because I also realized that I felt that entrepreneurs specifically didn't have access to the things that big businesses did. And what's interesting about big business, people think, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, I can't really like resonate with what's going on with big business. I'm like, Sister Ella, big business was once a small business. Trust it and believe it. Okay. They just decided they wanted to build something. You know, Steve Jobs started off in a garage. Jeff Bezos started across a dining room table. You know, these people had a small business. They just decided they wanted to make it big. And my point is, we don't have to make our businesses like that. I didn't. I didn't want all of that. But I wanted to have a successful, profitable, impactful business, right? The rules still apply. That's my point. You still have to learn how to message and communicate in a way that is powerful and influential, and preferably, always preferably, ethically. Because the thing about marketing is, I call it the, you know, it's like the battle between, you know, good and evil. Because if you are a great marketer, you can convince people of anything. And that's why I'm on a mission to make sure that people are good marketers, you know, that they influence in a way that ethically enrolls people into the vision that they have, that helps the people that they want to help. And so this archetype model that's under the master brand method is a way for you to know, as the founder of your business, what is the voice of the brand and how do you communicate it in a way that's powerful in the marketplace? And so that's what it is. And I have an actual psychological diagnostic assessment that was actually certified by the University of Monterey that I created a decade ago that I use every single day in my business to help people find out what their archetype influence mix is. That's what we call it, the AIM, the archetype influence mix. And so, you know, so that's what it is.
Yeah, ladies, stay tuned and check the show notes, because Jen has very graciously allowed us access to that assessment. So we're going to cover that later on and have it in the show notes as well. I mean, when I took this test, it blew me away. And frankly, this mix, some of them surprised me. So how about we go through the 12 archetypes and how they work together?
Yeah, I'll quickly do that just so that, and then what's great is, as you said, Judy, you know, a little mystery here. I'm going to give your listeners the full archetype influence mix. I just want to, let's just put it out there. Let's take away any of the mystery. They will get it. You will all get it. And every single day, people pay our company $250 to access these diagnostic reports for their brands. So I'm super excited to give it as a gift to everyone. And there's no strings attached. Literally, like, get the reports. You get a video to teach you how to use them, which will, because if you're listening to me right now and I go through the archetypes, you're only going to get a little taste. And I want you to be able to experience the full power of it in your business. So let's quickly go over the 12 archetypes. So they are the maverick, the ruler, the alchemist, the creator, the sage, the provocateur, the explorer, the healer, the hero, the muse, the advocate, and the lover. And I'm not going to go into every single one because I want to respect the time here. But what I will say is that the archetype influence mix is your top 3 results of those 12. Okay. So we call it the dominant, the intrinsic, and the intuitive archetype. So that's your 1, 2, and 3. And the most important of the 3 is the top one, the dominant archetype, which is if you can start to speak through the voice of your dominant archetype and use the intrinsic and the intuitive archetype to be what I call the salt and pepper to the main meal that seasons up the messaging, you will become a more powerful communicator, which will help not just obviously in your marketing, but even inside of your company. Even if you're a tiny company of one with one part-time contractor, it'll make you a better delegator of things because you'll be able to express exactly what you want to achieve in your vision. So, for example, my company and me as the founder is a ruler, explorer, lover archetype mix. So that's my mix. And what that means is the ruler is kind of the CEO of the archetypes, the expert, right? Also, they have control issues. The ruler archetype likes to control things end to end. Explorer archetype is about casting a vision and creating a map to get there. You know, they love to explore new things, uncover new things. Many entrepreneurs tend to test with explore in their mix. And then the third one for me is lover, which means that I love extraordinary beauty in the things that I do. And beauty doesn't just mean aesthetics. Okay. It doesn't just mean physical beauty. It can, but for me, it's not about that. It's about showing people what's beautiful about themselves and being a reflection of that. And so even as I've spoken on this 30-minute podcast with Judy, I hope you can even hear by that very fast summary of my own archetype mix that I am a ruler, explorer, lover, just with those little descriptions. And it's because I've honed my voice, my stories, and my marketing in such a way that I can speak through that. And it's helped me a lot in terms of getting people to not just trust what we do, but also, feel part of a community that gets them,
Absolutely.
So in these reports that all of you will be getting when you do the work, to do the assessment, you'll be able to find that out too. And I just want to say one more thing about it, if that's okay, Judy.
Absolutely.
When you all take the assessment, please be one of three things, like all these three things should be true. Be completely sober when you do it. And I don't mean that to be judgmental. And what I mean by sober is awake. Okay. Don't have a dranky either. Like, don't have a glass of wine. You want to be totally focused because this is an actual assessment, not a clickbaity type of quiz that just asks a lot of random questions. So the second part of it is it's a psychological assessment of what you really care about. And so that part of it means that you can't skip any questions and you have to finish it in one sitting. So it's going to take you about 20 minutes. And the third thing is speak from the place that you are now, not from who you envision yourself to be in the future. When you answer the questions, because what matters right now is that you build your brand from who you are, not from who you believe you want to be. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so with those recommendations, have fun with the assessment. And I would love for all of you to even share them with me, whether it's like in Instagram in your stories, or also like you can direct message me on Instagram at jennifer.kem, because I love hearing your mix and finding out how the report spoke to you.
Yes. And you are so approachable. And I just love that. So ladies, it's going to be masterbrand.me/extraordinary. I'll put again in the show notes. One last question, Jen, just for one quick minute. This is called the She is Extraordinary podcast. So I always like to have my guests share who is an extraordinary woman in your life and why is she extraordinary?
And is it okay if they passed? Is that
absolutely? Yeah.
Well, I have to say my grandma, who I said that I lost in 2008, my grandma, Generosa Valbuena, her mama named her right because my grandmother was the most generous, loving human being that I've ever encountered. And she modeled for me that you can be generous and still have a life that people remember because of the way you treated them. And so I even, I just bought a vineyard, and we're naming our vineyard after her. And so it's called Generosa. And that's the way. Generosa is kind of a value of mine. And she's also the most extraordinary one that ever lived, in my opinion.
Wow. Wow. What a beautiful story. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing your wealth of wisdom and your input and just your heart. It is such a blessing to have you on the show. Thank you again.
Thanks, Judy.
All right. And ladies, thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and a review and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.